So we all know that video game preservation, let alone fighting game preservation, is a joke. The go-to solution, at least in the eyes of the corporations, is the old compilation title. Don't get it twisted, I love it when these release regardless of genre. It can act as the perfect gateway for some of these series, and also get me to catch up on titles that normally wouldn't have been initially accessible to me. Even if we did live in a perfect utopia of all games ever being easily accessible, I would still love these compilations since they act as a digital museum for the player to take an even deeper dive into how these games were even made, or maybe even show off merchandise and trivia that you never knew even existed. Since this is mostly a fighting game channel, let's talk about some fighting game collections that I personally find notable. The first instance of a fighting game even getting a collection that I can recall is from the big boy Street Fighter itself in 1997. Since at the time games weren't stuck on a 4MB cartridge anymore, since we were in the 5th generation of consoles. They could slap these ROMs on a disc and have plenty of space for extras such as art and the like. When it comes to Street Fighter, Capcom just can't resist re-releasing Street Fighter 2 in some way, and I feel like having them release it as part of a collection would somehow justify that. The first Street Fighter collection released on the Sega Saturn and PS1 in 1997. The first Street Fighter collection even came on 2 discs. That must mean that this collection is jam-packed. Nah. This first disc has Super Street Fighter 2 and Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Having Turbo in this game certainly makes the inclusion of Super 2 seem kind of redundant in my eyes, since if you play that version, you're just going to be playing a way slower version of Super Turbo. At the time, this was the easiest way to play a close enough version of Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and people kind of settled on the PS1 version of this game competitively, at least for a little while, in spite of the bugs and balance issues that this version had. The second disc solely contains Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold, which is the first time that the Gold version released outside of Japan. The main difference in this version is Cammy's sprite from X-Men vs. Street Fighter, which was cut and pasted into this game, and was a secret character that could only be picked in practice and versus modes. In addition to that, there's a mode where you can fight against Akuma just straight up and test your mettle against this overpowered boss version with as many tries as you'd like. If it's not evident already, to me this collection is kind of lacking. It's probably more notable for what's not included. Oddly, Street Fighter 1 is nowhere to be found. As I've mentioned in another video, this is seemingly Capcom's phase just pretending this game never existed. This is also lacking Alpha 1 oddly. No gallery mode, music player, or anything like that, so kind of a dud of a collection here. This release is even more strange since Street Fighter Alpha 2 had a standalone release a year prior, so this game kinda makes that version invalid in a way, since this is just a slightly better Alpha 2 with 2 versions of Street Fighter 2 included. I suppose if you didn't own Alpha 2, this is the ideal way to do it, and you can consider the disc with Super Turbo a nice bonus, or perhaps the other way around, I don't know. They followed this game up a year later with an even worse offering than before, being Street Fighter Collection 2, not Street Fighter 2 Collection, as I feel many would have thought at this time. Though, are they really wrong anyways? This was a PS1 exclusive, and this collection only includes 3 versions of Street Fighter 2 this go around. The 3 versions being the first release of Street Fighter 2, its speedier follow-up, Champion Edition, and Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting. I feel like maybe we could have switched out one of the Street Fighter 2 versions with the last collection to at least give the illusion of variety here. This version at least has a gallery mode with a very Christmassy sounding background song playing while you view these amazing illustrations. We also got a tips section and a music player where the 3DO version of the tracks can be heard. We also have an interesting mode called Deluxe Versus, which enables 2 players to compete against each other by selecting between characters from any 3 versions of Street Fighter 2 in the compilation. This is kind of a precursor to Hyper Street Fighter 2 in a way, which we'll talk more about in a tick. This game actually came out under way different branding in Japan, being part of the Capcom Generations line. The Capcom Generations line was a PS1 series of games Capcom released as a compilation of their arcade titles. For example, Capcom Generations 1 had 3 1942 games, and the second had 3 Ghosts and Goblins games, and so on. This was the 5th one. Since this collection is part of that line, this makes that release more forgiving in Japan. In America, they called this Street Fighter Collection 2, so the expectations are going to be a little bit different because of that title. If we look at the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection on the PS2, we have Hyper Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. Which, hey, little side note, but is it just me or does it seem weird when companies call a compilation of 2 games a collection? I don't know, to me it just seems more like a pair than a collection. Not to get all Webster's dictionary, but a collection is defined as a group of things or people. Is this a group? Okay, sorry. Anyways, Hyper Street Fighter 2 was particularly interesting since, similar to the Deluxe Versus mode, in Street Fighter Collection 2, you could mix and match all previous Street Fighter 2 versions with every character as long as they were in that game. This was still super turbo at its core, however, since the arcade ladder, endings, and stages were all in that style. These weren't flawless recreations of those older versions though, like with certain missing glitches and tech, but it was still pretty faithful to those versions overall, even down to their character portraits and voices. This game had multiple different soundtracks to choose from, and even the entirety of Street Fighter 2 animated movie included. Having a whole movie is like the greatest extra ever, and I'm gonna tell you right now, that ain't gonna be topped by anything else I mentioned in the video. Also, yep, I know this is the censored version, so no Chun-Li nudity for you. Saying all that, take this movie away, however, and the extras are just okay. You can listen to multiple different versions of the Street Fighter 2 soundtrack, as well as viewing the openings and the endings for the different games and characters, but that's about it. Can't even play the bonus minigames or anything, since it seems like they were cut. Street Fighter Third Strike has the same features as the Dreamcast version, so that's cool it has more than just an arcade mode, but this was a lot of people's first exposure to Street Fighter 3, so I feel like it could have been sweetened a bit by perhaps having viewable artwork or some developer interviews or something in that vein. For having both of these enhanced versions of Street Fighter 2 and 3, I'm beating a dead horse here, but it makes the omission of Street Fighter 1 even more apparent. I'm not saying have a Super Street Fighter 1 in the collection where it adds all these crazy things that can make it good, but you can at least put it in to show people how far the series has come with each game. That aside, both of these games could be played online, which would be cool if the PS2 online wasn't so awful and the Xbox controller was better for fighting games like this. But we took what we could get at the time. One last aside about this game is this 15th anniversary logo. I thought it was saying Street Fighter 75th anniversary, and my dumb kid brain just never questioned Street Fighter being around in the late 20s, but in my defense, that one kinda looks like a 7, right? Okay, I'm dumb, I get it. 2 years later, in 2006, this collection was followed up by the Street Fighter Alpha Anthology Collection. On the surface, this includes 5 games having all 3 Alpha games and Alpha 2 Gold, in addition to Super Gem Fighter Minimix. This collection has unlockable versions of the Alpha games such as Alpha 3 Upper, which includes extra characters, but not the ones from the PSP version like Ingrid and Maki. This is the roster that was updated in the Dreamcast version, including people like Guile, Evil Ryu, Balrog, Fei Long, DJ, Julie, Junie, and T-Hawk. There was also a game called Hyper Street Fighter Alpha where, in a ROM-like hack version of Alpha 3, you can play in completely different styles that would be similar to like Marvel vs. Capcom or Street Fighter 2 if you wanted. This could only be played in Versus or Training mode, that being said, and you can only play on the dramatic battle stages too. Maybe that's because those stages are less strenuous on the hardware with all these extra gameplay features, but seems like a stretch. Also, the gallery mode. There's no fucking gallery mode. If we had to sacrifice the gallery mode for these bonus games, then I think that's a fair trade if we're being real. Hyper Street Fighter Alpha alone makes this collection worth it to me. This collection flew under the radar for most people since I don't hear it talked about much compared to the Anniversary Collection. I guess it's hard to compete with 2 mainline Street Fighter titles that could be played online, but I don't know, I just preferred this collection over that one. Maybe it's because I prefer the Alpha games and Gem Fighter to both Street Fighter 2 and 3, but that's just my bias. The Alpha Anthology couldn't play online anyways, unlike the Anniversary Collection, so perhaps that and being a PS2 exclusive was a factor in it kinda being buried. Capcom didn't really give this same level of respect to its other non-Street Fighter titles, unfortunately. I can think of 3 Capcom fighting series that aren't Street Fighter that got collections. I'll talk about the other 2 later, but one series in particular that got a couple of collections was Darkstalkers. The first Darkstalkers collection was exclusive on the PS2 and sadly only in Japan. This game predates the Alpha Anthology by a year, and Alpha Anthology has a very similar UI to this game. Vampire Darkstalkers collection has all 5 arcade titles of Darkstalkers, but has an interesting exclusive character being a corrupt version of Donovan, which is just him Frankenstein with Dimitri's sprite, but it's still awesome to see they did this character edition, and his ending was the last continuation to the story we ever got. Also, hey, we got that gallery mode. To me, this collection was better than the one we got on the PS3 and 360, since that one is just 2 games with even less extras. Also, hey, the fate of the franchise's future wasn't dependent on this collection succeeding, so there's that. Darkstalkers didn't get another collection until 2022 with the Capcom Fighting Game Collection. I'm kinda cheating with that answer too, since Street Fighter is still in this collection. This roster of games is pretty solid, that being said. You can play either the Japanese or overseas versions of each game. You can change some options that you wouldn't be able to do in the arcade versions beyond just easy and hard modes, such as being able to easily pick secret characters. The inclusion of a training mode is also a godsend for this collection. For most people, the best feature though is being able to play all of these games with rollback netcode. Like the Darkstalkers collection on the PS2, this has all 5 Darkstalkers arcade games, the previously mentioned Hyper Street Fighter 2, but without all of those extras the Anniversary collection had. Also, Red Earth's inclusion is especially noteworthy since the game never came out outside of Japan. It's about time too, since this game is referenced all of the time in other Capcom games. We also got Gem Fighter and Puzzle Fighter, which the latter is absolutely not a fighting game, but I see it as a nice bonus, so I guess that's cool regardless. Lastly, we have Cyberbots, which is a very underrated gem here, and the exact kind of game that belongs here. I do find it odd that both of the Saturday Night Slam Masters titles are excluded, since the first one was included in the second Capcom Arcade Stadium collection. Sure, we can argue logistics if wrestling games are fighting games, but all of those arguments are void since we have a puzzle game in here. I know people are also wanting to have the 3D fighters in this collection, and I'm right there with you, but I think that being separated in its own collection is for the best, since that represents a totally different era for Capcom. Let's just hope they actually do that. Outside of the game themselves, I do feel a tad mixed on the extras front. We do have a great art gallery of each game, which for games like Cyberbots and Red Earth I think are important since these games aren't likely to get an art book or something, so it's nice to see rare concept art and promotional art preserved in this collection in some way. We also got a music player with remixed music that is exclusive to this compilation. It's unfortunate though that you can't really do anything with this music, since it's not like you can listen while you're playing any of these games in the collection or something. It's on Spotify, so that is nice, but I guess in-game Capcom just expects me to sit there and listen to it with my arms crossed. Why did they bother putting the effort for these songs if you can only listen to them in this menu? Despite that, this collection is a big improvement over the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary collection that came out 4 years prior. These were not bad ports of these games as far as I know, but they were just so bare bones. First off, you can only do training mode and online for 4 of the games here, which I get are the really popular ones, but if you're gonna allow 2 versions of Street Fighter 2 to get these modes, you couldn't throw Alpha 2 a bone at least. When you play this game locally or online, whenever the match ends, you don't see the character's win quote or anything like that. The game just abruptly cuts to the collection's UI asking if you want a rematch or quit the game. It seems like, at least when the game launched, the online feature wasn't in the best state and wasn't exactly the best way to play online for any of these games. I would say that the online is better now, but I wouldn't know since I can't connect a game with anyone now. Oh well.
Are you ready? Go!
Anyway, okay, so you're not gonna find anyone if you create a lobby. So you know, next thing that you do, you wanna do this, and that guy didn't have a connection bar, so I can't wait. All right, so I want to play this. All right, this guy wants to play with me. Cool. Oh, what is this option here? I don't remember this in the arcades. Okay, well, you know what? I like Super Turbo. Oh, you want to play Alpha 3? Oh, guess what? No, you get to play this game, dickhead.
You fire up new challenges, whatever. Sweet, replay. Okay, start. Okay, well, start pauses the game. All right, how about this one? Okay, that's the share button. That's not gonna do it. How do I? Nothing. Game doesn't start. Game don't start. Here's what it is. I already changed it on my end. I don't think it'll be the same for every single game. Oh, you have to change it for every game. Start button is mapped to, can you see it on your end? I think you can. Start button is mapped to touchpad. And a lot of sticks don't have touchpad. So if you want to start, you have to make the start button start. But you can't. If you press start on start, you don't get start. Because the start button, what does it do? It does that. It pauses it's built into the UI of the game.
Also, weirdly, the game lets you pick the stage when you first start up the multiplayer and local play, but when you hit rematch, it goes back to the character select screen. I would also say that the UI for being able to pick a stage in these games is pretty good. It's similar to the Street Fighter V stage select UI, but I guess we're only allowed to see it that one time. To be fair here, the extras on offer are pretty good. On the timeline feature, it goes over little bullet points of history of the series. It debuts a screenshot of the unreleased Street Fighter 1 on the NES, so that's kinda neat. We also got a sprite viewer, which I'm a sucker for, and it shows some of the animations for special moves for each character in each game. That being said, we're missing some characters from Street Fighter 1. It seems like the only ones here are playable characters in future games. Also, Gil seems to be missing too. Kinda weird to cut corners for this feature, but okay. This menu is all accompanied by a remix of Sakura's theme, which I think is a nice relaxing song to listen to while perusing these features. One last gripe about this game is how piss poor the trophy list is. There's not even a platinum trophy. I know most people don't care about trophies in games, but I think it adds a little bit extra replay value to some games if done right, which here it absolutely did not. Lastly, let's talk about Street Fighter 6. Now, this is interesting since most of these games you can only play while online, since in the Battle Hub they go in and out of rotation daily. But some of these games you can play offline in World Tour mode, like Final Fight, so like the Yakuza series, this game is kind of a secret collection title. If you have their Season Pass, you can own these games to play them whenever you want, but you have to have an internet connection at all times. And this also applies to World Tour mode, since the arcade machines that you can find in the world change out every now and then, and I guess that's why you need to have a constant connection. So not as cool as Yakuza, where those arcade games you can find can be played offline. One quirk of these versions is that you're forced to use a CRT filter like you would find in an arcade. That's cool to me if these are forced in the Battle Hub, but once you own the game from getting the Season Pass, let me turn that shit off. I don't know why they chose to do this, but it's weird the options to do anything with these games are extremely limited. Not to poo-poo on the Savage Bees fans here, but I know most of these games aren't fighting games. But we still got Street Fighter 1, 2, Alpha 1, and Alpha 2 here, so this is technically a fighting game collection, but just with a lot of caveats. At this point, I'm convinced that a Tekken collection of any kind will never happen. I would love for the statement to age poorly, but I know in my heart that Namco probably doesn't see older Tekken games as something that could make money with its PS1 style graphics. Tekken did have a secret collection game, however, in a backdoor kind of way through the PS2 release of Tekken 5. This included the arcade versions of 1 through 3 and Starblade, which have never been playable outside of arcade machines through legitimate means. These being the arcade versions mean the backgrounds are actually in 3D and not 2D like in the console versions, but it also means there are no extra modes, character endings, or even certain characters. If you hold select on Tekken 2's press start menu, You can play an alternative version of the game where it replaced Jun with Beck as well as messing around with other dip switch options. Replacing Jun with Beck to me is a huge downgrade, but at least this option is here. I assume the arcade versions were chosen for many reasons since the ending FMVs alone would probably take up too much space on the disc, and Namco couldn't exactly use the guest character Gon in Tekken 3 without having to jump through some legal hoops. Even if you have other versions of Tekken 5, I still recommend picking this up if you're a Tekken historian, since it has all of these games included and started. Dead or Alive Ultimate on the original Xbox, I feel is like in a weird blurry line of being a collection or being just a bundle. It just has two games, the first being DOA 1 being just a cleaned up version of the Sega Saturn version. I know Tomo Itagaki loves the Sega Saturn and all, but why this version over the arcade one? Or even the updated arcade version DOA++? Maybe it's a case of lost source code, but I feel like they could have thrown a ROM of the original arcade release in addition to this one. This is still nice to have, that being said, and you can get it on the Xbox Marketplace and play it on your Xbox Ones and Series X. The other game here is DOA 2 Ultimate, which is a remake of, you guessed it, DOA 2. It's not very often a fighting game gets an actual remake opposed to a remaster, but DOA 2 Ultimate is absolutely the definitive version of 2. The stages are insane and the graphics look like they're next gen compared to the original. With the addition of online play, this was one of the few games I actually ever played online back in the day. They also included something I'd like to see more in collections, and that's a mini documentary made by G4 through the show Icons. Or Game Makers, I guess. Maybe G4 didn't think anyone knew what an icon was. Anyways, this particular video is pretty funny when you realize they cut 15 minutes from the original episode out. They cut any mention of other consoles like the NES and the PS1. Or, references to other fighters like Virtua Fighter and Itagaki's favorite series, Tekken. Or even the mildest hint of criticism.
Going on Xbox was certainly mixed. Tomonobu Itagaki made a conscious decision to take Dead or Alive to Xbox. A lot of fans were disappointed by that. There were a lot of different lighting effects. In fact, a lot of people complained that the lighting effects were overdone. There was an over-brightening effect that made everything look sort of bleached out to the point where you actually lost some of the really sharp, striking coloring.
Also, I feel like this dude was holding back as much as possible when talking about Itagaki, like he had some real tea to spill. It's just funny to me they cut out so much stuff, maybe because they were afraid to advertise for other systems. But if you're so confident in your game in partnership with Xbox since it's so powerful, should that not be a concern if what you got now is so amazing and superior? Side note, but for the Mega Man collection, a GameCube exclusive feature also had a G4 Icons episode, but they only cut out 1 minute from the original. They still talked about the Sega Saturn and PlayStation in the video, and even made the PS1 look badass with this music stinger.
Nintendo has retired their Super Nintendo, and Sony's PlayStation is sending shockwaves through the industry.
That stinger wasn't even in the original version of the episode, by the way. Okay, sorry, getting sidetracked here. This collection of DOA is a pretty great deal even now, but again, I feel like if we're calling this collection, we're stretching the definition a little bit. I mean, like, if DOA Ultimate is a collection, then does that make Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks a collection since it has Mortal Kombat 2? What about the thing that's actually called Mortal Kombat Collection for the PS2? It's just 3 games bundled together, there's no extra features or anything. In fact, they took the extra stuff out since the special editions for Deception and Armageddon had a bonus disc, and that ain't nowhere to be seen here. This just smells of, we have extra inventory and we've got to pawn it off somehow. Anyways, the closest first attempt to a Mortal Kombat collection we would get was through the Midway Arcade Treasures, specifically the second one. This collection is just a bit busted too, since certain games like Primal Rage are just a bit glitchy. The Mortal Kombat games on offer here are only 2 and 3, and not Ultimate 3, just the Vanilla 3. The first game was only included on the PSP version of this game, unfortunately. I assume it's so they could make the special editions of MK Deception more enticing since the bonus disc had MK1. Another issue of these games, as pointed out to me by Tabmock, is that MK2 has it where it's impossible to fight Smoke, since to even fight him, you need access to that start button. Once you see the famous Dan Ford and Toasty pop up on the portal stage, you need to hit down and start right away, but hitting that start button pulls up the menu of the collection instead. So doing this and even picking random on the character select ain't happening. I do appreciate the extras here though. It has a great behind the scenes making of for Mortal Kombat 3. Later, a collection for the first 3 MK games came out on PC, Xbox 360, and PS3, which I poo-pooed on a video before. But if you want it, you still got time since it's for sale on the Xbox 360. In the States, it seems like there are Steam codes for sale through Amazon, but try those at your own risk. I can't find this anywhere on the PlayStation Store though, through the PS3 itself or on the desktop version of the store, but that could be because these stores are on their last legs and are almost impossible to find anything. Hey, one last gripe with this collection is that if you get out of the start menu during gameplay, your character won't be on the move for a moment. Cool. In the vein of Midway Arcade Treasures 2, there are collection titles that happen to have fighting games in it that are great, like the TMNT collection, having all 3 Turtle Fighters that released on the NES, Mega Drive, and SNES. There's also the Capcom Digital Collection on the Xbox 360, being the only way you can own a physical copy of Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix. If you're a psychopath, the Atari 50 Anniversary Collection has the only easy way to play the classic Atari Jaguar game, Fight for Your Life. I mentioned Yakuza earlier, and each game in the series starting with Yakuza 5 has different offerings of classic Sega games. Throughout the series, the fighting games on offer are Sonic the Fighters, Virtua Fighter 2 and 5, Virtual On, and the first Fighting Vipers. For the most part, these games are accessible through just finding them at an arcade in the game itself or through the main menu. These games can even play locally with 2 players as well, which is incredible. Just can't help but think that wouldn't it be cool if all of those classic Sega fighters were in one single package? But hey, I'll take what I can get here. Perhaps this is the only way these games would sell anyways, at least maybe that's Sega's point of view. Another standout collection that only has a single fighter, oddly enough, and that's Rare Replay with Killer Instinct Gold. This was the N64 version of Killer Instinct 2, which is a different enough version of this game for it to be warranted on this collection. I just wish they added the SNES and Game Boy version of Killer Instinct 1, since I think in the same way as KI Gold, it's also justified in being here since it's so different. On the topic of Killer Instinct, there is actually kind of a secret collection through the physical copies of Killer Instinct on the Xbox One. The disc has both arcade versions of Killer Instinct 1 and 2, along with some incredible extras. This is one of my favorite collections we've talked about. It checks all the boxes, concept art, pics of merch, documentary videos, the whole soundtrack to listen to, and even some lore deep dives. It is a little annoying though that this is installed and is considered an app and not a game, even though you can play other titles through this app. But I think that's because it acts as a portal to play those other games if you choose to have all 3 installed. But I'd still prefer it if it was in the game section. Anyways, I'm just surprised how many people are sleeping on this. I guess since they sold all 3 of these games separately, but if you're a Killer Instinct fan or you want to see what the hubbub is about, snag this copy right away. So I know earlier I was moaning about the whole 2 game being a collection thing, but some of these franchises don't go past 2 games anyways, so maybe I'll keep my mouth shut about those. An example being the Power Stone collection on PSP. This is a great pair of games, and they even enhanced both of them. You can play as the 4 new characters introduced in Power Stone 2 in the first Power Stone, as well as 2 extra characters that were initially unplayable in the second one. This kind of falls under a similar category as the DOA Ultimate situation, but I guess it's better this time that both games are on one disc, UMD. This game is still available digitally on the busted-ass PS3 era PSN store, and also the PAL version is available in Walmart in the US. So yeah, snag it while you can, I guess. My dream collection game is a Marvel vs. Capcom collection, but sadly I'm starting to doubt more and more that it's ever gonna happen. The closest we got was the old 2-game collection Marvel vs. Capcom Origins. This was digital only and on PS3 and Xbox 360. Right off the bat, I'm gonna tell you this game is delisted, so don't get too excited. But this was a pretty solid deal having HD versions of Marvel superheroes and MVC1 with online play. Let me tell you, this game's trailer for just this small digital title captured the spirit of these games flawlessly.
Capcom presents 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
Hold it!
This version also had unlockable artwork and viewable character endings, as well as being able to unlock the secret characters for both games. Since some of them were unplayable to begin with, or just had to do a really long code on the character select to even play as them, this was an excellent quality of life improvement. I just wish we could have played as Onslaught in some way, since he was playable in the PS1 and Dreamcast ports of the game. I also think the package could have been a bit better if an extra game or two was included. I know X-Men vs. Street Fighter and Children of the Atom weren't included because if a game had X-Men in the title, that would be a breach of the deal Marvel had with Activision since they had exclusivity on X-Men games at the time. But why couldn't they include Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter? I know that's not like the best game or anything, but the point of a collection isn't to cherry pick just the good games. You gotta have all the history you can so you can understand where games evolved or even stumbled. I swear this next game is the last of these 2-game collections I'm gonna mention, but this one is interesting because it's only a collection title in Japan and PAL territories. That's the Guilty Gear 20th Anniversary Pack, which thank God it's called Pack just for my own mental stability, and this is the most honest title these 2-game packs can be called. This physical copy is only for the Switch and not available in the States. You can still get the digital versions of these games on the Switch, PS4, and PC, but they're all sold separately. So therefore, since both games are packed into one cartridge, it's a collection game in anywhere but America. Nothing too special about these versions since there's not much in terms of extras, but I will say there is a cool feature to use the superior Korean soundtrack in XX. I highly recommend Slayer's Korean theme if you ever get a chance to listen to it. Lastly, let's look at SNK's many collections. When SNK released their collections on PS2, I feel like they had a bit of a rocky start. You had Samurai Shodown Anthology, Art of Fighting Collection, World Heroes Anthology, Fuin Super Combo, Fatal Fury Battle Archives Volume 1 and 2, all of which had the exact same UI in their game selection menu. I'm not super big on it since SNK is known for a lot of personality and style, and this menu shows none. However, this does have a cool option for a color edit mode for some of these games, which is a unique option for sure, and also a nice way to view all the sprites for these games. Other than having a sound test, that's about it. That being said, the emulation for these games is not perfect. Be it missing moves like finishing moves in Samurai Shodown, or audio glitches, or it feeling just a hair off. Maybe just me here, but I do feel like there's a bit of input delay in some of these games, but perhaps it's just my TV setup. Anyways, most of these PS2 compilations actually got re-released on the PS4 digitally. You can also get them physically if you got them through limited run. However, most of the issues that it had before just transferred over to the PS4 version. These issues aren't as bad as the KOF Orochi Saga collection though. That game was released on the PS2, PSP, and Wii. This one really feels buggy for sure, and it just seems like a bit of a rushed job. First off, the games themselves do have a couple of features like a training mode and a difficulty toggle for the arcade mode. Though maybe because these are arcade games, regardless if I put this game on the easiest difficulty or the hardest, I feel like there's virtually no change since I'm getting my ass kicked regardless. I'm sure you also noticed this already, but did I mention how ugly these menus are? This doesn't really make me want to explore this collection at all. Plus, it loads really often, and when you pick a game, the load screens sometimes give you move lists for characters that aren't even in the game you picked. The loading doesn't even stop at the gallery section. When you view a picture, it takes a bit to load, and I'm playing this on the PS4 version, by the way. You can't even swap between pictures. You have to go out and go back in a new pic, so you can't just flip through. I don't know how you mess up controls for a picture viewer, but they pulled it off here. Up and down are inverted here, which takes some getting used to for me, but also moving in general feels almost slippery in a way. Like this UI is on ice or something. You also can't hit a button to hide the UI, and you have to remain idle for a bit, which is just a small drop in the bucket of my many complaints here. As opposed to the American version, the Japanese version seems like it got the worst end of the deal, at least on paper, since it omits KOF 94 and 98. I can kinda get cutting 98 since it's a non-canonical dream match, but 94 is the first game in the series and the debut of the Orochi saga as well. This version's menu reverts back to the other SNK PS2 collection's UI, which I didn't think I'd miss. The Japanese version, at least from just my personal take, seems to have way less input lag than the overseas one, which makes it much better to play. In addition, Japan did get an exclusive collection, being the Nest Saga, which I feel like is pretty solid. Yes, it has the old tried and true UI of the other collections, like we got the color editor and the sound test. In terms of the games themselves though, we have KOF 99, 2000, and 2001, so the collection covers the Nest Saga. These versions are also enhanced with redone 3D stages, but my favorite inclusion is that the original Neo Geo arcade titles are also included. These versions also have additional modes like single battle, survival mode, and a practice mode. Lately though, SNK has been killing it with the collections. There are 2 Neo Geo Pocket collections for the Switch and PC, and it's awesome that these even exist. You can change your Neo Geo Pocket that you use as the glorified border, which is a really cute touch. A quality of life improvement to enable a rewind or save state as well. I also really like that you can review over the old manuals, since those deserve to be preserved as well. Best of all, you can play these games versus locally. Now, to me, the best fighting game collection so far, and why I saved it for last, is the latest Samurai Shodown collection. The presentation on what's available is really to be admired. First of all, you have the perfect arcade versions of Samurai Shodown 1 through 5, as well as Samurai Shodown 5 Special and the unreleased Samurai Shodown 5 Perfect. Now, releasing unreleased games is a big deal in my book. Can you imagine if Capcom did something like that? Everyone would be losing their minds. For this collection, you can also switch back and forth between the localized versions and the Japanese versions, which is always so appreciated when it happens. These games can also all be played online using rollback netcode as well. The real cream of the crop though is the extra section. You can view all kinds of different illustrations of characters and stages, and for once in these collections, it's actually organized in a very simple way instead of just a 100-page slideshow of everything. You can also view the sprites for each game as well as learn the character's lore. We also got developer interviews, some high-level gameplay footage, and a music player. This is the kind of collection I just wish King of Fighters, Fatal Fury, and even some Capcom games would get. It was made by Digital Eclipse, who you might recognize as the team that did the Street Fighter collection on PS4. To me, they've vastly improved and really outdone themselves here. I even love the menu theme being Nakaruru's theme remixed in a slower, more chill way, making it just the perfect song to hear when going through this gallery. Even this game's trophy list is great. It has you discover things I didn't even know existed, like the move where you turn into a chibi version of yourself in Sam's Show 2. I hope that Digital Eclipse will do another fighting game collection in the future. I'm cool with pretty much any series since I'm now confident that they're gonna kill it. It's actually far and few in between when a fighting game collection does release. Capcom seems to be the company that does it the most these days, and that's just based on 4 collection titles. a 5th if we're cheating with Street Fighter 6. It's honestly gone to the point where I'm buying stuff I wouldn't normally be interested in, like the Atari 50 collection and Mega Man Battle Network. I guess mission accomplished on the company's part. As we discussed before in another video, game companies are not super interested in preserving their legacy titles. They might not even see these older games as profitable anymore, even if we broaden this to include all games. Honestly, I feel like lately collection games have slowed down a bit. The issues of video game preservation are highlighted towards the lack of these collection games coming out. And I don't see the harm in releasing these collections, since with how these AAA game budgets are inflating, these compilation titles can be released in between those bigger ones to have something with a smaller budget come out and really strengthen the franchise's brand.